Donc je suis Alexia, je suis responsable du lancement international de Trello. La France est le premier pays dans lequel Michael vient, donc on est ravis d'être là ce soir. On est ravis d'être avec cette communauté de startups qui est très forte en France. Nous on a un hashtag pour le lancement qui est bienvenue Trello, donc si vous tweetez, n'hésitez pas à l'utiliser. On est live en français depuis hier. C'est une aventure un peu différente des autres pays dont Michael vous parlera. Si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas, je vais rester là et je serai là ce soir. Je vais laisser la parole à Michael qui vous parlera de l'entreprise. Bonne soirée.
So, hi everyone. I'm very happy to welcome Michael tonight. The idea tonight is to have an open Q&A with him. So I'm just going to ask him a few questions first for about 15 minutes, which I hope will be original, even given that he's been doing interviews since he arrived to Paris yesterday. And then I'm going to give you the mic so that you can ask your own questions. Okay? So welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
Great. Tired.
I can imagine. So just a few words about Trello. Basically, as you all know, Trello is like the free, flexible, and creative way to manage your projects. And you launched in 2011 in iOS only. And less than a year, you had 500,000 users. And then in July 2014, you raised a 10 million round with Index Ventures and Spark Capital. And then you spun out of Creek, the company in which you created, and you reached 5 million users. Then in May 2015, you started recently to go international. And just recently, today, well, yesterday, you launched in France. You announced 10 million active users, a bunch of new integration features, and Trello Business Class. Seems like you've been pretty busy for the last couple months. So first of all, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Well, it wasn't all me, right? It was mostly the team. And yeah, but it's been a wild ride. Yesterday was a huge day for us. It's sort of like you spend all this time sitting in front of a computer, working on things, not knowing how the reception is going to be, and then you launch and you hold your breath, and then you see the tweets come in, and it was actually a fantastic day. We had a big celebration back at the office. We were celebrating last night. It was just a great moment.
So can you guide us through this new strategy? Like, what are you looking for, Chief? What was the thinking behind this new strategy?
Yeah, so when we launched Trello, we knew we wanted to build a very horizontal tool that people could use for any kind of purpose, not just software developers, but marketing people, salespeople. You could use it to plan your wedding, your vacation. The idea was, can we take something from this idea of Kanban and the visual, agile system and build something that was very useful for a lot of people. And our goal was to essentially say, look, we could get 100 million people using this. We'll find 1% of those people that get a lot of value out of the product, and we can charge those people, say, $100 a year, and there's a $100 million business. Those are just made up numbers, but it was sort of to give the scale of what we were trying to do. We knew, because we were a startup, we knew that the product would have to market itself. People would have to organically tell other people about it and evangelize it. It couldn't be us going out and trying to convince people to use it. We knew we were going to have a big free user base, and recently we got to a size where we thought it made sense to start going to companies. We had a lot of companies using it. It was coming up in this team and that team and that team, and we go to the company and say, hey, did you know you had 4,000 people using Trello within your company? We can sell you this enterprise version that has a lot more security and controls and gives you management over the boards and build out the business aspect of the company.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting because it's also a new trend that we've been seeing in B2B startups. It's a bottom-up way to enter enterprises.
I think that people are generally working differently than they used to work. Like, companies used to be very structured. There'd be a lot of management, a lot of process, and now you see a lot more companies that are a lot flatter, less management. And I don't think, I think people tend to say that that's like a simpler structure. I think it's actually much more complicated. It's more complicated to have a company that's very flat and doesn't have a lot of management. And the reason why companies can be like that and move quicker without the extra hierarchy is because the tools have gotten better at performing the function that managers used to do. So you used to need a lot of hierarchy to help the collaboration and the communication across the company. Like, I would report to my manager would report to her manager, you know, and so it would, you sort of had this process of information would move around the company like this, but now you've got tools like Trello, Slack. If you look in certain verticals, like a lot of the tools like GitHub and Salesforce, and you know, there's just about getting information moving around, people being able to do things and figure out where they are and where they need to go. It's a lot easier now to support companies with less hierarchy.
This is also a big part of your new strategy. I mean, to offer a lot of integrations with the services that people already use, so they can be more comfortable using Trello. Yeah,
because I think that you know, there used to be this model that you would go into enterprises and you would sell, say, the CEO or the CIO or basically the C-level suite, right? And I just don't think that that's how a lot of software is being sold anymore. You know, like teams are essentially left on their own to make decisions about what tools they want to use, and so they'll use whatever they like, whatever works best for them. And then, so you want to make that, you know, flexible and easy, and then you basically can go in and say, hey, I have something you can pay for. You can do it at this size. You know, you don't have to sign a $3 million deal, but across the company, you can still get that kind of revenue out of a big corporation.
Okay, interesting. So before becoming, I mean, now you're obviously have a strategy, you know, to get on the business side of, you know, the business offer, etc. But before that, you had a big consumer part within your user base. So, for example, Lifehacker, they called Trello the project management tool that makes projects actually fun, and also you're kind of considered like the internet's whiteboard. So what's the biggest challenge in creating a product that does basically everything for everyone?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge is we compete with so many different things, depending on the context. You know, so if you're talking about, you know, there might be a startup that's doing bug tracking with Trello, and there's like a million bug track. Our Fog Creek makes a bug tracking tool called Fog Bugs. So if you're doing, you know, you might be using it for your sales pipeline. And then you're like, oh, you know, now we have 20 salespeople. Maybe we're going to use a vertical tool like Salesforce. But I also think that's one of the benefits is that, you know, in the same way that you might use Excel, the spreadsheet app for, you know, doing some expense tracking when you're a small company, and then you're like, okay, this process is getting a lot more defined. I have some very specific needs around expense management. You know, then I can go into this vertical tool. But Trello isn't trying to be that. But we fit in a lot of places where those other tools don't fit. So it's actually an analogy that Joel came up with. He said, you can think of those vertical tools as rocks on a beach, and Trello's the sand that fills in all the space between them.
Well, speaking of unexpected places, actually I read on a blog that Trello is the 4th used app in Nigeria for professionals. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Do you have any plans to enter the African market?
I had no idea. I had no idea. I think like Stack Overflow is, I'm on the board at Stack Overflow, and that's North Korea is like it's one of the top websites from visited by North Korea, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, Stack Overflow, so you co-founded the company that created Stack Overflow, and actually Trello is a spin-off from that company, right?
Yeah, so Joel Spolsky and I started Fog Creek in New York City back in 2000. At the time, you know, if you were a programmer in New York in 2000, you could get a job at a bank or an advertising agency, and that was basically it. Like, if you wanted to work at a software company, you had to go to California. You had to go to Silicon Valley. And so we didn't want to move to the West Coast, so we said, crazy idea, let's just start a software company in New York. And so we started consulting and building some software on the side, and we knew, like, our goal was really to just get a bunch of smart people together and see what happens and build different things. It was never to build a bug tracking tool. And over the years, we've built, I don't know, probably 15 different things. You've heard of Trello, you've heard of Fogbugs, you've heard of Stack Overflow, and there's probably, there's like 13 other things that were giant failures, maybe a couple things that were mediocre successes, and but we learned a lot along the way. I think like over the years, we took a lot of those lessons and applied them to Trello and applied them to Stack Overflow and sort of learned from our mistakes and built on top of that.
Yeah, a funny thing that I saw on your Wikipedia page of the company, you actually created it because you wanted to build a great place for the developers to work. And I read also some stories about how you had like custom designed offices with the views to remove eye strain, etc. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, working in a space like this seems like it's sort of normal now, right? That you're in this beautiful space, but like programmers back at that time would be stuck in an office, like you're the back office, essentially. You were there. If you were working in a bank, you were really supporting the traders or the finance team. If you were in the insurance industry, you were always sort of in the support role. You weren't like in the starring role. And, we wanted to create a software company founded by developers and say, developers are the stars. Like, these are the people that are hard to hire. And like, now you look around and, it's very common, not that we invented this, but it's very common to have catered lunch, private offices, but it's also part of the reason that we do that wasn't just because we think that developers are very important, but also because the kind of work that needs to be done by a software developer is very creative, and it's you sort of need a space to do it in when you're in the flow and you're writing code and you get interrupted because you're out in an open space and there's people next to you. Like, it takes you so much time to get back to what you were doing. You don't always recognize all that time that's wasted, but if you're sort of in your office and you can close your door and take a moment and have the quiet and just crank out code, you can be so much more productive.
Right. And this is a question that you probably get all the time, but you actually have a bachelor in computer science. You graduated with honors, but you were Stack Exchange CFO until 2014.
Yeah, so I have no finance background, and I was the CFO. Well, so how does that happen? So when we started Fog Creek, there's all this stuff that you have to do when you run a company. I mean, now in the US now there's actually startups that do this stuff for you, like payroll, and at the time that didn't exist. We had to like invent a lot of things that you can just buy as a service now. Like all our credit card processing was hand built, and things that you would never want to do now. But Joel and I traded off those duties that were like not software writing code. So like he would do the payroll and the QuickBooks and the finance for a year, and then it would be my turn. And it was my turn when we started Stack Overflow. So I had to get, I had to keep doing the books and the payroll, and so that was my title, was CFO. And then, at some point we had enough people that we said, okay, we should hire a real finance person to be our CFO, and I can go spend my time on Trello. And
well, I guess some of that experience helped you in your role as COO today, CEO.
Yeah, I guess. It's like, I don't know if processing payroll really is that like of a life-changing experience, but it did sort of like, it was funny because you, like, I think when you start a company, it's, you sort of have to make this decision between, is this a competitive advantage or not? Like, is this a core competency that we need to do and do ourselves because it's going to make a difference? Or is this something that just won't actually have an effect on the success of our idea, and so we can just outsource this to somebody else? And I think payroll you can outsource. That's not, it's just one of those things that needs to get done. But you're always sort of thinking about that, should we, it used to be that like, I think this is still a question. You can use AWS and build your whole stack on top of AWS, and that's awesome. And we do at Trello, actually. But it also means you're dependent on a third party. And if AWS goes down, like, Trello's down. I mean, yes, half the internet's down now, but also Trello is down. And there's no way to fix it. You just have to sit on your hands and wait. And you could do things to mitigate that, but you're really relying on another person. And it's expensive too. So doing the startup, you just sort of have to make those trade-offs and figure out what you should focus on and where you should spend your time. That's always sort of the dilemma of a startup. It's like there's a million things to do, but what's the one I should do next? That was actually one of the reasons why we built Trello, was sort of surface that information instead of just being overwhelmed by the millions of tickets you have in your tracking system. It was sort of like, let's just be honest. Like, there's a couple things that you're going to focus on right now, and just decide what those are and focus on them, and don't worry about the other stuff, because if it's important, it will come back.
Yeah. So you have a lot of experience with, well, launching many successful projects, but also quite a few failures at your previous company. So do you have any advice for bootstrapped entrepreneurs? Like, what's the one advice you would give today?
I would say two things. Don't be afraid of failure. Like, I was talking about this the other day with people in France, but just sort of like it's just part of the process, right? Like, there's so much that you learn, and figuring out when to call it quits is sometimes difficult, but it's just part of the process. There's gonna be lots of startups, and there's gonna be a lot of failures, right? And just a few of them are gonna succeed, but usually the cost of failure is pretty small, and then you start over and do it again. The other thing that people should think about is that like, doing a startup sometimes entails imagining the world not the way it is today, but the way it will be in 2, 3, 4 years. It's almost like, if this succeeds, the world will be like this. It won't be like what it is like today. So the example I give is like Airbnb. They went around and they said, people will rent out their rooms and strangers will come and stay in them for money. Like the idea seems a little bit ludicrous.
Yeah, people were like, are you crazy?
Yeah, or like, yes, I understand that people would do that, but those are probably the same people that would let a random person sleep on their couch. Yeah. Like, because they're just nice people. It's a very small subsection of society, right? Yeah. And they just sort of had this vision that was much bigger than that sort of understood that if you took away some of the pain points, the number of people that would be willing to do this activity is actually very high. And I think that vision is really important in sort of saying, this is what the world is going to be like in the future, and I'm going to try to get there, not I'm going to try to optimize something that's happening right now.
Okay. Thanks for the advice.
Sure.
Also, previously, when we were talking off stage, you told me that you have 2 daughters. I was wondering, how do you manage, work and personal life? Do you have any tips on that?
I mean, that's always been also part of our culture at Fog Creek, which is to maintain a good work-life balance. And, we have, I think it's like 12 weeks of paid maternity leave, 6 weeks of paid paternity leave. Like, it's very important. We pay for people's takeout, like $500 of takeout food when they have a kid. Like, it's just, one of the, you don't get that time back when you have a child, and so it's very important to be with my daughters and spend time with them. I think when I go home, it took me a while to realize this, but it's not like my contribution is I go to work and my wife takes care of the kids. It's like I still have to do 50% of taking care of the kids, and that means I have to do all my work and have time to take care of them, and yeah. It's hard, but you just sleep less.
Okay, sleeping less. Everybody wrote that down? Thank you. Besides that, what's next for Trello? What are the next steps? What are you going next?
So it took us... So when Joel launched this at TechCrunch Disrupt in 2011, it was September 2011, so 4 years ago, he got up on stage and he talked about Trello, and he said, our vision is to have 100 million people using this, and it was sort of like, that's an audacious statement, and it's sort of, it took us 4 years to get to 10 million, and I think that we'll get to 20 million within the next year. So that sort of acceleration of growth and signups and the number of people that are talking about Trello and using it in all kinds of different ways and recommending it to other people and going internationally, like, I think that's just around the corner for us. And I think that as a tool, what's next for the tool is sort of recognizing that people use a whole bunch of different tools to get things done. And they, you know, things like people here probably use Slack and GitHub and Salesforce and all those things, and sort of putting Trello at the center of that and sort of imagining this is your dashboard essentially for everything that you have to think about, even if it's at work or at home, and you can just rely on this to tell you the status of where you are and where you're going. Yeah. That's really our vision for Trello.
Nice. Also about Trello, when you use the product, you actually get the impression that you kind of see the company culture in the product. You know what I mean? Like your product translates your company's culture, but can you describe it to us? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about?
Do you mean because it's like fun to use? Like it's enjoyable?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like a one of those things you always hope to have when you create software, is something like that. People love your product, and it's one of those intangible things that's just worth so much and just makes you smile so often when you see the tweets that people put about Trello, and you sort of say, "Wow, who knew people could have so much fun using, you know, planning software, right?" But there's something about, and we've tried to figure out, you know, what is it exactly? Like, can you put your finger on it? Or you try to think about, like, why is Slack so successful when there's a million chat apps out there, right? Like HipChat does basically the same thing, but everyone loves Slack. And I think with Trello, part of it is, you know, the visual aspect of it. I think that's the way people think. They're very visual, they're spatial. You look on people's refrigerators, they've got their pictures, their notes, you know, you put your Post-it notes around your monitor. Like that's how you think if you go into a space. I bet there's probably what I call a physical Trello board somewhere around this space, you know, which is actually a whiteboard with Post-it notes on it. So that's one thing. I think also the act of dragging the cards, this like tactile nature of the program, and there's something fun about it, like just the way the cards tilt, and just the whole activity is just kind of it's a lot about the design, right? So it's not so much the software, it's about the emotional appeal and your connection to it and how it makes you feel, and about, you know, like one of the things that we want Trello to do is take away anxiety that people have. You know, like it's supposed to answer a question. It's supposed to allow you to not go to the meeting because you already know where you're at. You don't have to have the meeting to figure out what the status is of the project because you already know. And so it gives you back time. Yeah. You know, it sort of creates time for you instead of trying to occupy your time.
Yeah, that's actually very nice. And why France, by the way?
So we looked around and tried to find places that were already using Trello. France was one of the top countries that had Trello users already. We saw that the engagement was really high with startups, and also it was being used in mostly business uses. Yeah. When we also looked at Brazil, Germany, Spain, and Japan. Yep. And we sort of, you know, those different markets have different sort of cultural needs. Like Japan is actually, to localize to Japan is quite a difficult project. There's a lot of things that you need to do. It's not just translating your app. And so we sort of said, hey, as a startup, how do we remove obstacles from Trello spreading organically in these countries? Where can we put our effort that's going to have the maximum effect? And France is one of those places where I think actually just making the app available in French as a first step will actually open it up to a lot of other businesses, because we already see a lot of traction in France.
And 80% of your acquisition is from word of mouth, right?
Yeah, I don't know where you got that stat, but I would say it would be even higher than. I mean, we're a very tiny marketing team, and it's I would say it's probably almost all word of mouth.
Almost all.
Yeah,
that's pretty impressive.
I mean, it's, you know, people telling other people how they use Trello. Actually, I think we have a couple startups going to tell their.
Yeah, they are.
I love that, because like I think one of the challenges for us as a company in building this tool is essentially getting people to understand all the different ways that you can use it, right? And there's even ways that we haven't even thought of. Yeah. One of our best examples of using Trello is how to use it to onboard new employees. And that was actually, this example was told to us by one of our customers. It wasn't something that we thought up ourselves, but what they do is they have a Trello board that has a bunch of things that an employee needs to do on their first day in one list. It's like cards like, you know, fill out these forms, create an account here. There's a list for all the things that needs to be done before the employee starts, where like other people in the company might do things, like the IT department needs to order their computer. Then there's a list for all the people in the company. Here's who Alexia is, here's who Stella is, here's who Brian is, you know, and it has a little picture. And then there's a list for all the cultural things and little like history stories that you might pick up on, you know, so you collect all these things on this board. When the person joins, you create a copy of the board and you put the person on the copy and they work through the board. If they have any questions, the hiring manager's on the board, they go through, they archive the cards, and it's sort of like a, you know, an active process. And you realize the last step of the process is for them to go back to the original board and add their face to the list of people working at the company. So it's sort of like self-documenting, you know, it's not like a wiki page that's just sort of static and like never gets updated. And so I was like, that's awesome. That's a great
idea, actually. Yeah. We have something pretty similar at the family, so I might steal your idea. That sounds really good.
And so I love that. Like, I think it's a challenge for us because, like, but I also think, you know, we're thinking about that and working on ways to help people share the ways that they use Trello and all the different use cases, because we know that's the only way that it's going to actually be able to spread as fast as we want it to.
Well, it's already spreading pretty fast. I mean, I saw on VentureBeat that you actually went up 2 million users since last April. So how do you handle that growth?
Like, there's probably like 125,000 people being added every week.
Wow.
And hopefully after that, so we see the growth. Usually, I've seen this in a lot of different products, not just Trello, but a lot of times you'll see adoption and you'll launch a whole bunch of new features, or you do a bunch of marketing and PR around it to tell people about what's happening. You'll basically touch a bunch of people, and you'll see the engagement go really high, or signups go really high, and it'll come back down. But the plateau that it's at after it comes back down is usually higher than it was before. And so you have this like stepping up, up, up. If you do nothing, you just sort of see the plateau, and you might see it actually go down. But you see this plateau, and you might have seasonal effects in there. Like Trello is used a lot in schools. So come September, it's like, boop, you know, it goes way up. So we know that, you know, after this event, going to France, launching the new business class, telling everyone about the 10 million signups, you know, we'll see a giant spike. And then the question is, like, how high will the plateau be from where it was before? But before this happened, it was 125,000 people every week. So it's a lot of people.
Nice. Yeah, you know, we get that in France because here, you know, during the month of August, everyone takes the whole month off. So you see everyone's stats, they go like this, and then August, it's like
that's
the valley
in a lot
death.
of places. We actually did a launch in Brazil toward the end of July, and we saw signups double, and we were like, and they stayed double. We were like, wow. And then August, they just fell through the floor, and we're like, what happened? And Alexia lives in Brazil, our marketing manager there, and she was like, everyone's at the beach. Like, it just took off. And sure enough, September came around and the signups went back up. So
yeah, you can't blame them.
Beach, right, of course.
Well, I think we've pretty much used all of our time, but we are going to open the mic for a few questions. So someone is going to be, so Pauline, she has a mic, so just raise your hands if you have a question, and she'll give you the mic.
You can also ask in French if you need to.
I'll translate.
Thanks for being here, first of all. I guess it's more a set of questions rather than just one question. One is, what's the top 3 reasons why you think you failed when you failed? And then, why did you decide to go iOS first? Was it because you thought that your user base was mostly iOS users, or just to go iOS first? And when did you actually launch an Android version? And at which point were you in the company? How many users, etc. When you decided to go for Android?
Yeah. So I don't. Did you say that we went iOS first? I think you said US first.
No, I think I said iOS. Was it not that? No?
Maybe we did. I don't remember. So it must not have been there might not have been a good reason.
You launched on Android 1 year later, actually.
Okay. I don't. It's like sort of a blur. You were talking about failures, and I can tell you a story about what I think contributed to one of our failures before. We probably about, might have been 10 years ago, we had some interns working for us, and we came up with a project for them to build a screen sharing tool to be used for customer support. So we were finding ourselves trying to talk to our customers and figure out what was wrong with the software when it was running on their machines. And we were like, if we could just see their machine and, you know, drive their mouse and type on their keyboard, this would be so much easier. At the time, there was like an open source software called VNC, but it was really hard to set up, and it was kind of wonky. You couldn't, these people weren't the most tech savvy people. So we kind of envisioned a product that we could build with the interns, and wrote a spec, and they came. We actually made a movie about it. It's really embarrassing to watch it now because it's a really nerdy movie about 4 interns making a software product. It's as exciting as it sounds. But it was called Copilot, and we built it, and it was successful for us. Like, it made money, and certainly made more money than we spent on it. And around the same time, maybe 2 years later, companies like Log Me In and Go to My PC came out, and if you watch the growth of those companies, it was just like astronomical, and they IPO'd, they became giant, successful billion-dollar companies. And at the time, you know, we had a head start on that. We had the idea, we had built it before these other people were playing around with that, even thinking about that idea. But we didn't really have the vision, and we didn't have, like, we were pitching this as a customer support tool instead of understanding that, you know, as people got more and more connected and they traveled, they'd want to get back to their computers, and sort of how do we make this tool applicable to more people than just customer support reps? And which is a question we asked when we started building Trello. So we sort of like learned from that mistake and said, you know, if we're going to build something, how can we build something that not only developers can use, but marketing people can use, and people can use at home, and people can use at work, and, you know, contractors can use, and architects can use. And we sort of asked ourselves that question because, you know, thinking big was sort of part of the requirements in order to get big. So I think that was one mistake that we made, was we didn't think big enough.
Okay, next question.
I know that you started Trello as part of an existing company, but have you at any time felt like you should have been to an incubator like Y Combinator or Techstars? Have you suffered from the lack of, you know, mentoring and network?
At the time that we started it, Fog Creek was 11 years old at that time. So we had built a profitable software business. I learned a lot of lessons. We had a lot of contacts in the industry. We actually self-funded ourselves, which meant that when we went to raise money, we had a lot more traction. We had like 3 years of traction, and investors were contacting us like, hey, can we invest? It was a much different situation than what, you know, everyone's like, well, how do you pitch people? And I was like, they actually tried to pitch us. It was a little bit, you know, so if you can have a successful product, then it's really easy to get investors, which is sort of the cart before the horse. But so it was a little bit different than, I think, a normal, you know, startup. We were kind of, Fog Creek was almost an incubator in itself, because we were taking the profits from our other tools and basically spending them on trying different projects, most of which failed or we killed because they didn't have enough traction. Yep.
I have another question, if it's okay. I've seen on your blog or job website that you are now recruiting anywhere. So I guess your team is a bit distributed right now. How do you feel about that?
So when we started Fog Creek in New York, I was telling you before about how there wasn't really an opportunity to work for a software company. And that was actually really good for us as a software company, because it made it really easy to attract people. We had people that were basically considering offers between Facebook, Google, and Fog Creek. And they were, you know, we were like, that's crazy that they're putting us in the same bucket as these other companies, but it was because we were in New York and no one else was. And then, you know, over the years, the startup scene and sort of even the larger software company scene in New York is very mature now. You know, you got Etsy, Kickstarter, you got all the incubators, you have all the big companies have engineering offices there. So we sort of lost that edge, you know, and at the same time we were building out Stack Overflow and we were working with a programmer in California, Jeff Atwood, and he was an adamant believer in remote work, that you could work just effectively with a remote team. And we kind of came around to that view and also felt like the tools that we had were getting better and better at enabling people to work remotely. You know, like I think the biggest issue with remote work is the communication.
And your Trello.
Yeah, exactly. It was part of the reason why we created Trello, but also even the, you know, the chat programs, HipChat and Slack, and all of the video conferencing stuff like Google Hangouts and Appear.in, and just being able to be present even though you weren't present. I think part of the trick that we still that's always sort of a challenge is that you don't want people to feel isolated. So we knew that if you were going to have a meeting, for example, and there were 4 people in the office and 1 person was remote, that we said everyone has to get in front of their computers for the meeting. Like, don't 4 people get in a room and have the 1 person on the TV because they won't talk, they won't participate. Put everyone on an equal level playing field in the company, and sort of we always remind ourselves to do that. And it's actually easy now because half the company is remote. We have people in Brazil, Peru, Newfoundland, Hawaii, all throughout the States. So there's people all over.
Thank you.
Autre question? Yeah, here.
Hi. Further to your last answer, my question would be, how do you create an effective company culture with distributed teams, like where everybody has a sense of belonging and has that sort of spirit that you want to create for your company?
Yeah, I mean, it's like something you have to work at all the time. There's a couple of things specifically that we do. When we hire somebody, they come physically to New York and they work out of the office for a week or 2 weeks or however long they want, actually. So that's one thing. We also try to get together once a year in person, which is really expensive, but it's sort of just the cost of attracting that talent. It's actually, I don't think it's actually cheaper to hire engineers remotely because, you know, it's not that you do it because of the cost. You do it because you can attract better quality of candidates than the people in your own physical location. We also, I think the communication amongst the team, so developers working on the same team actually get to know each other pretty well, but the cross-team communication just like almost never happens, right? So if you're in the same place and you're having lunch together or you get a coffee, you run into, the developer runs into the salesperson, right, and talks to them in the kitchen. So we actually had to invent something to facilitate that, and we call it Mr. Rogers, where every week you get randomly paired with somebody and you just spend 20 minutes talking to them, and it's sort of, you don't have to do it, right? Like there's people that never do it, but those people would never talk to anyone even if they were physically there. It's like that same person, you know, so like, but the people that are interested in meeting other people from the company are able to have this opportunity to just sort of, you know, get together, and there's kind of an excuse for it, essentially. It's like, this is part of what we do. You do your Mr. Rogers every week if you want to meet people. So I think it's just sort of always thinking about that. And when we have parties, for example, we had the big party in New York yesterday to sort of celebrate the launch of France and our new business class and the 10 million signups. And they put a big monitor up on the wall and had everyone dial in, and you know, they basically had all the remote's faces on there. We have a physical wall in the office that has pictures of everyone that works remotely, so you can just, you know, you see a face, you're like, oh right, that, it just reminds you that the people work there. So it's something we're constantly working at.
What do you do to keep the product simple? Because usually when companies grew, their product get more complex. And one of the reasons why we use ourselves Trello is because it's so simple. I mean, compared to Jira or other solutions.
I mean, so there were a couple core tenets of Trello when we first created it. And one of them was the simplicity. One of them was also the visual aspect. We actually ask ourselves a lot, like, what would this be Trello like? You know, is this mean Trello when we think about whether we should do a feature or not, or how do we do this feature? And part of that is like, is it fun? Like, does it actually delight you? Is it applicable to everyone? Or is this just, you know, like swim lanes or Gantt charts or something that only a certain subsection of the population would actually care about? But we did build in a way to allow Trello to get more advanced for people when they, you know, after they understand the tool. The example I like to give is, you know, if you use Excel, there's a feature called pivot tables, which is actually super powerful and not a lot of people know about it. And if you tried to explain that to somebody when you were first showing them Excel, they would never get it. But it's there, it's sort of hidden, but if you know where it is and you know how to use it, it's super powerful. So we came up with this idea of power-ups that we would add to Trello. And before yesterday, we had a calendar power-up, a card aging power-up, where if you didn't touch a card for a while, it sort of got a little gray, or you could make it look like an old pirate map. And then there was a voting power-up, so you could vote on cards. But they're basically things that may not apply to every board. You might want to turn them on for a specific board or not. Yesterday we added a bunch more. The Salesforce, the GitHub tie-ins, the MailChimp, Twitter, Google Drive, Dropbox, Box. There was about 10 that we added yesterday. And so our vision is essentially like make sure that Trello itself stays simple and easy to use and understand, but give people the flexibility and the power to make it a little bit more advanced. Just don't confuse everyone with that power.
Actually, when you were talking about power users, that just made me wonder, like, what's the most extreme use or like the craziest use of Trello you've ever seen?
I don't want to say this is a wrong way to use Trello, but like I saw somebody that was using it and they said, oh yeah, I stopped using it. And I was like, oh, why? And they were like, oh, it just got too complicated. And I was like, can you show me your board? And he like logged in and showed me, and I was like, oh yeah. The way that they were using it was just like they had one board for everything. Like, you know, like we have tons of boards. Like we make boards for different things, and we link cards out to different boards. Like we have roll-up boards that we call, like a board that might be a summary, like status report on which the individual cards might sort of point to other whole boards. And in the board, it just like kept scrolling to the, you know, I just kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and like down, down, down. You know, and I was like, you know, part of the vision for Trello was actually, it's a constrained space. It's like a, you know, a cork board, right? You can put a certain amount of things on the cork board, and if you want to add more, you're going to cover something else up, right? Because that's the way, like you can only keep so much in your head. There's only so many things you can focus on. It's like if your inbox has 1,000 email messages in it, like how many of those are really important, right? And do you feel weighed down by the fact that there's 995 messages that aren't really that important to you, but you're just too, like you haven't done the work to let go of them? And I, you know, it's not really just Trello. It's like sort of any tool you use, right? And it's like, how do you help people get focused? That's sort of a question we ask when we're designing Trello and thinking about features to add.
Okay. Any other questions? Yep. Like.
Hi. You might recognize the logo over there. So we have, I think, a lot of common, common customer, common audience. So I was wondering, how are you going to address the large corporate market? Like, do you have a good footprint already, and like, what's the plan going forward?
About a month ago, we launched our Trello Enterprise product, which is our business class product plus some other features that enterprise care about, like single sign-on, intrusion detection, like legal reviews of contracts. You wouldn't believe how important that is to people. When they first sign a deal, it's like, sign this, our 20-page master services agreement. And so we did have a lot of traction with enterprises because Trello is free. You have a lot of teams within a company using it, and it just comes up organically within the company, and so you end up with these large organizations that have many Trello users, thousands of Trello users, not in one department, but spread throughout the organization. And so we go to them and basically say, did you know that you had 5,000 people using Trello? And we have all these tools like single sign-on and permission controls that you can use to make sure that you're in control of all the data for your company. And they're happy to sign a deal. So it's a pretty easy sales process.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now we're going to give the stage to 3 startups. We talked about how Trello has such a wide variety of uses. So basically, you can do anything with anyone. So we're going to see how these 3 startups use Trello. It's not going to take more than 10 minutes, I promise. So then we can go to the bar and have a drink together with Michael. Sounds good? Thank you.
Du coup, la première startup qui va vous présenter comment elle utilise Trello, c'est Le Wagon. Et donc, c'est Sébastien qui va vous présenter ça tout de suite. Merci.
Bonsoir à tous. Alors, je voulais parler rapidement de comment on utilise Trello. Alors, juste pour ceux qui ne savent pas, le Wagon, c'est donc une école de code qui a pour mission d'apporter du savoir-faire technique aux esprits créatifs. Et donc, en fait, on utilise Trello pour gérer les candidatures au Wagon. Alors, en fait, si vous candidatez, vous allez sur ce site, vous avez un formulaire, donc rien de sorcier. Vous remplissez ce formulaire, et derrière, nous, on commence à gérer votre candidature. Alors, la toute première version, janvier 2014, c'était un truc un peu archaïque avec un Google Drive où on devait copier-coller des données depuis la base de données dans ce Google Drive, et ça ne permettait pas vraiment d'avoir une vision du process de recrutement. Donc en fait, on a vite abandonné ça, enfin, c'était le truc bricolé pour lancer, et on a eu une V2 5 mois plus tard qui a mis Trello en fait au centre du process. Alors, ça nous a obligés à réfléchir à notre processus de recrutement. Donc en fait, un élève, il passe par plein d'étapes. Il passe par l'étape où il candidate. Ensuite, on va lui envoyer un mail en lui disant « c'est cool, book un entretien ». Il passe l'entretien. Si l'entretien se passe bien, on lui demande de faire un tutoriel de Ruby en ligne pour vérifier qu'il est motivé et qu'il va vraiment passer 9 semaines à coder avec nous. Enfin, s'il a bien réussi son tutoriel, il va recevoir un contrat, il signe le contrat, on va lui envoyer la facture, il paye la compte, et il est embarqué. Donc voilà, on a tout ce process, et en fait ce process, il va de gauche à droite, c'est un peu un process de sales, et ça se translate très simplement dans un board Trello. Donc on a un board Trello en fait pour chaque nouvelle promotion, où on a une colonne par étape du process, et en fait on bouge les cartes de gauche à droite pour avoir la candidature. Donc ça, c'est concrètement ce qui se passe sur chaque promotion. Alors, comment en fait on crée les cartes? La toute première version qu'on a fait, j'ai pas du tout codé, j'ai tout fait avec les outils en ligne. Et le premier outil qui est très utile, c'est Zapier. Zapier, ça vous permet en fait de mettre un formulaire comme un formulaire Woofoo par exemple, qui va à chaque fois que quelqu'un remplit le formulaire Woofoo, poster sur Trello une nouvelle carte. Donc en fait là, il n'y a rien de codé, c'est vous mettez un formulaire Woofoo sur votre site et derrière vous avez les cartes qui apparaissent dans Trello. Donc ça, c'était la première étape. Ensuite, quand on bouge une carte de inbox à first contact, ce qu'on voulait, c'est qu'un mail parte automatiquement pour demander à la personne « book un entretien ». Donc là, dans Zapier, vous pouvez faire un truc très très fin qui est de dire quand une carte bouge de cette colonne-là à cette colonne-là, alors faire telle action. Et faire telle action, là en l'occurrence, c'était envoyer un mail avec Gmail. Donc ça, c'est un truc de Zapier très très cool qui se connecte avec Trello. Donc, on avait toujours des étapes manuelles avec ce process qui sont les suivantes. L'aspect booker un rendez-vous. Donc en fait, c'est un process par mail. On avait donc un secrétariat qui gérait les allers-retours en disant est-ce que le 5 c'est bon, est-ce que le 6 c'est bon, etc. Donc ça, c'était manuel. Une fois que l'entretien est booké, on déplace la carte à la main. Ensuite, ça marche plus. Ensuite, on avait la notion de vérifier que le tutoriel était bon. Donc là, il fallait demander à la personne son username, vérifier que ça marche, etc. Donc ça, c'était manuel. Ensuite, on devait envoyer le contrat. Donc la toute première version d'envoi de contrat, c'était on envoie un PDF, la personne imprime, la personne signe et scanne et renvoie. Donc vous voyez, c'est assez compliqué. Donc ça, c'était un truc manuel. Ensuite, on réceptionnait et on devait vérifier que le contrat était signé. Et enfin, on envoyait la facture à la personne et on vérifiait que la personne a bien payé la compte. Voilà. Et quand la compte est payée, ça passe dans Go, et tous les gens dans Go, c'est les gens qui embarquent pour la promotion. Alors ce process a bien marché pendant 6-8 mois. Le problème, c'est qu'il fallait créer un formulaire Woofoo par promotion, donc tous les 2 mois refaire ça. Il fallait créer 3 apps, donc des intégrations pour chaque promotion, et il y avait toujours beaucoup d'étapes manuelles qui nous prenaient du temps, et c'est pas du travail très intéressant, juste envoyer des mails pour dire quand est-ce que tu es libre, etc. Donc on a un peu retroussé les manches et on a codé une 3e version avec cette fois la puissance de Trello. Et la puissance de Trello, en fait, elle est cachée dans la documentation technique. Et la première chose qui est importante, c'est son API. Donc l'API Trello, ça vous permet en fait de créer automatiquement des cartes, c'est ce que Zapier utilise. Donc nous maintenant, quand vous candidatez sur le site, ça crée dans Trello une carte avec votre profil et avec ce que vous avez mis dans le formulaire. Donc par exemple, là c'est une carte qui a été créée, donc ce qui est cool c'est qu'il y a du markdown. Le markdown c'est un format texte où vous pouvez mettre des balises et ça vous fait un petit affichage de la description sympa. Donc on a ce genre de trucs qui apparaissent nous dans notre Trello quand vous candidatez. Et donc ça c'est la première chose, l'API. Ensuite, comment on automatise... Alors juste une petite slide de code que vous pourrez aller voir. C'est 20 lignes de code pour ajouter une carte Trello, c'est très simple. Donc ensuite, quand la personne passe de inbox à first contact, en fait, il y a l'inverse d'une API, c'est-à-dire un webhook, c'est quand Trello va vous appeler et dire il s'est passé tel événement. C'est ce que Zapier utilise, et donc là, vous pouvez aussi l'utiliser. Donc Trello qui poste chez nous, donc on a codé ce qu'on appelle un middleware, donc c'est une petite application qui écoute quand Trello a des activités, et nous ce qu'on fait c'est que quand la carte bouge de inbox à first contact, on envoie un email. Donc ça c'est la première chose qui remplaçait Zapier, ça permettait de ne pas avoir à recréer à chaque board Trello et à chaque promotion le zap. Donc ça c'est la première chose. On va continuer à ajouter des choses sur ce graphique. Deuxième truc, c'est quand la personne passe dans interview, c'est-à-dire qu'on veut qu'elle prenne un rendez-vous. Alors là, on a mis un outil qui s'appelle Acuity Scheduling, qui permet de linker ça avec un calendrier Google des personnes qui font l'entretien. Et donc, automatiquement, vous pouvez booker un slot en ligne, et ça va vous pousser ça dans le calendar, et ça va vous le pousser aussi par un webhook. Donc il n'y a plus d'échange manuel entre un secrétariat et un candidat, tout est fait automatiquement. Donc ça c'est assez intéressant, et ça c'est encore grâce au webhook, c'est pas quelque chose uniquement de Trello, c'est quelque chose qui existe dans pas mal de services. Alors ensuite on a dû coder un petit checker qui va scraper Codecademy pour vérifier que la personne a bien fait son Codecademy, donc ça c'était un peu de code. Alors la partie contrat, donc le contrat qu'on envoie par PDF, qu'on imprime, qu'on signe, c'était pas terrible, donc on utilise un service qui s'appelle HelloSign. Donc par l'API d'HelloSign, on va demander à la personne de signer. Et donc l'API d'HelloSign va nous renvoyer une information par webhook pour dire c'est bon, elle a signé, et à ce moment-là on peut ajouter le label sur Trello pour dire que la personne a signé. Donc là vous voyez on a vraiment presque tout automatisé. Dernière étape c'était l'envoi de la facture, donc là quand on déplace la personne, enfin une fois qu'elle a signé son contrat tout simplement elle passe dans la case facturation, et là on utilise Zoho qui a aussi une API, et elle reçoit un email pour payer son acompte. Donc finalement les deux trucs qui restent qu'on ne peut pas automatiser, et ça c'est un peu à vous là du coup d'aller disrupter le secteur financier, c'est checker que la personne a bien payé. Donc il faut encore aller se connecter en ligne et voir les virements, essayer de matcher chaque virement sur chaque facture. Donc ça c'est l'étape un peu chronophage. Voilà, merci à Trello pour l'API, les webhooks, c'était cool.
Donc vous l'avez compris, le wagon utilise Trello pour recruter ses élèves. Il sera dans le coin si vous voulez discuter de tout ce qu'ils ont fait avec Trello. Les suivants, Octobat, Nicolas et Gauthier, qui vont vous présenter rapidement aussi ce qu'ils ont fait avec Trello. Merci.
Bonjour à tous. Donc juste un petit mot pour commencer. Donc Octobat, en fait, on est une solution en ligne qui permet d'automatiser deux choses, le calcul de la TVA et la facturation. Donc production de facture, envoi au client final, mise à disposition sur un site, etc. Donc on se base sur les données contenues sur les plateformes de paiement. Aujourd'hui on supporte Stripe, demain on essaiera d'en supporter d'autres, type GoCardless, PayPal, etc. Et on arrive à agréger via les données présentes sur ces plateformes tout ce qu'il faut pour produire les documents comptables en France et en Europe, et aussi en Australie, mais je ne pense pas qu'il y ait deux Australiens dans la salle. Donc nous, on utilise Trello pour un besoin très particulier, c'est notre pipeline de vente. Et je vais vous laisser Nicolas présenter tout ça.
Bonsoir. Donc comme disait Gauthier, on l'utilise en tant que pipeline de vente, logiciel de prospection commerciale, pardon. Donc il faut savoir que on n'entre jamais de carte dans Trello à la main. Donc tout ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on utilise l'API Trello pour sourcer nos listes. Donc on a codé un petit bot, un petit hack en interne qui va récupérer tous les sites qui utilisent Stripe, enfin le maximum de sites qui utilisent Stripe. Voilà, c'est nos clients potentiels, on va dire. Ensuite, on récupère un maximum de données sur la boîte, donc on va dire la localisation, les cofondateurs, leur email, et on push tout ça dans Trello. Ensuite, moi, le lendemain matin, je me lève, voilà, je vais faire un tour sur le Trello, et je vois les nouvelles cartes qui ont été ajoutées. Je les prends une par une, j'envoie des mails aux cofondateurs des boîtes qui utilisent Stripe, et voilà, j'attends une réponse. Si j'ai pas de réponse, je relance. Je note à chaque fois la date à laquelle je les ai contactés. Voilà, par exemple, je sais pas, Legal Start, voilà, le 30 mars 2015, je les ai contactés pour une première fois. Quand j'ai une réponse, très bien, je bouge de liste. Donc j'ai eu une réponse. Ils ont signé à Octobat ou il y a eu un deal directement. Donc ça, c'est le but ultime, on va dire, c'est d'aller tout à droite et de bouger cette carte le plus à droite possible pour convertir. On a eu cette idée en lisant un article il y a quelques mois. Donc je vais le mettre sur le meet-up et comme ça vous aurez tous accès. Voilà. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Et enfin, la troisième start-up, du coup, encore Nicolas, mais de chez Blablacar.
Merci. Bonsoir. Donc, rapidement, une toute petite question. Qui connaît Blablacar? Ça me rassure. Qui est peut-être ambassadeur Blablacar? Quelques-uns, ok. Rapidement, je vais vous présenter un petit peu comment on utilise, quelques manières d'utiliser Trello chez Blablacar. Il y en a presque autant que de personnes, mais on en présente 3 qui sont bien utiles aujourd'hui. Bon, déjà, on utilise les groupes chez Blablacar, donc on a créé un groupe Blablacar avec tous les gens de l'équipe technique, en fait, sont dedans. Ce qui nous permet comme ça d'activer plus facilement les droits sur certains boards, etc. Bon, voilà, ça c'était un petit détail. Un premier cas d'usage, c'est le fait qu'on organise des tech talks, en fait, où chaque semaine, il y a quelqu'un de l'équipe technique qui présente un sujet technique, n'importe quoi, à toute l'équipe. Et du coup, l'idée, c'est de se dire, on veut centraliser un petit peu toutes ces idées qui viennent de l'équipe. Alors, on a les sujets qui sont les suggestions, qui n'ont pas encore... Quelqu'un veut entendre parler peut-être de quelque chose, mais on n'a pas encore de speaker. On va avoir les sujets qui sont un peu plus près, voilà, avec les membres associés, qui va raconter en fait cette histoire. Et enfin, donc on a Dev et Archi, on fait une distinction entre les deux parce qu'on fait une semaine sur deux, bon voilà. Et ensuite, on peut du coup voter pour chacune de ces histoires, de ces présentations, pour dire quelle est celle qui nous intéresse le plus. Donc on utilise du coup le système de vote, qui nous permet après d'ordonner les cards et de choisir celle qui va passer pour la prochaine fois. Un deuxième usage qu'on a, c'est qu'on a une équipe remote en Roumanie, à Bucarest. En fait, c'est même une remote de remote, puisqu'il y a des gens à Bucarest, il y a des gens à Cluj, il y a des gens à Kiev. Enfin bon, c'est une équipe de 5-6 personnes, mais qui sont tous à distance. Et en fait, on travaille en Scrum. Donc on a le Product Owner et le Scrum Master qui sont à Paris, et le reste de l'équipe qui est donc à distance. Et en fait, très bien, on a nos cérémonies régulièrement sur toutes les semaines, en fait, pour toutes les 2 semaines, même précisément. Et en fait, à un moment donné, vient la phase de rétrospective que vous connaissez sans doute bien. Donc l'idée de faire l'amélioration continue, de remonter un peu ce qui va bien, ce qui va pas bien, comment va l'équipe et essayer d'améliorer les conditions de travail de l'équipe. Et en fait, on n'a pas de board physique pour faire ça. Chacun crée ses post-it, mais on les a pas. Donc là, on utilise Trello en fait pour pouvoir déterminer qu'est-ce qui va bien, qu'est-ce qui va pas bien. On le voit évoluer en direct au cours de la cérémonie, et du coup, c'est un support qui vient remplacer un board physique quand on a comme ça des gens qui travaillent à distance. Et enfin, un troisième et dernier usage, assez classique également. Vous remarquerez les fonds d'écran très sympathiques, parce que je suis membre Gold, du coup, c'est ça qui est sympa. Avec, à force d'inviter des gens, on arrive finalement à être Gold. Troisième cas, c'est pouvoir travailler avec des prestataires. Donc là, on avait en l'occurrence 2 personnes avec qui on travaillait pour développer un petit outil maison interne pour notre usage. Et du coup, on a utilisé Trello comme moyen de communication pour savoir justement un petit peu où en étaient les tâches, comment elles évoluaient, s'il y avait des actions particulières à faire dessus. Et voilà, tout simplement. Donc à la fois un outil qui peut marcher pour des problématiques internes, des problématiques remote, des problématiques externes. C'est assez complet et après, voilà, chacun en fait son usage. Merci.
Donc, merci à tous d'être venus ce soir. J'ai une bonne nouvelle pour vous. Vous avez tous droit à 3 mois gratuits de Trello Gold. Donc, on va vous envoyer un message via Meetup. Si vous êtes tous inscrits, on va les tweeter aussi. Donc, ça, c'est un cadeau pour vous. Sinon, c'est pas fini. Comme j'avais dit, on passe au bar. Il y a des cookies, il y a des jus de fruits, il y a des bières, il y a du vin. Donc, restez avec nous, échangez avec les gens. Et puis, on ne s'appelle pas des familles comme, pour rien. Faites comme chez vous. Allez.